Okay, do you remember just a few, 8 months ago, we had beautiful Maui, Hawaii was devastated by all those fires. Remember that? It seems like overnight, everybody just stopped talking about it. Maybe their silence is because the power company, whose largest shareholders are BlackRock and Vanguard, they were discovered to be at fault. It just seems a little suspicious. Jason Jones is a film producer, author, activist, popular podcast host, and human rights worker. He's president of the Human Rights Education and Relief Organization. His humanitarian efforts have aided millions in Afghanistan, Nigeria, and Ukraine, as well as pregnancy centers and women's shelters throughout North America. Jason is a senior contributor to The Stream and the host of The Jason Jones Show. He's also the author of 3 books, The Race to Save Our Century, The World is on Fire, and his latest, The Great Campaign Against the Great Reset. Joining me now, my friend, Jason Jones. Jason, how are you?
I'm doing great, Shemane. It's wonderful to see you.
I wanted to get all of that info in because you're so busy. I don't know how you do it all, but thank you for doing it all.
Quad espressos.
So let's talk about Maui. You lived in Hawaii and you're very familiar with what happened there. Some people think that there's no way the fires were caused intentionally. What do you think?
Well, that we don't know, but what we definitely know is that there is a land grab that's taking place and that there's a conspiracy and that there's a cover up. There were laws that were passed weeks before the fire saying that if property was damaged by a fire, you couldn't rebuild there. There was the plan for the smart city. What we're doing a documentary. In fact, we really want to talk to you about this because we know how much you care about Hawaii and how you've been fighting for clean water in Hawaii. The state of Hawaii has been fighting battle after battle the past couple of years. But the real goal of my writing and the real goal of our film is to do really two things. We need to find out who is responsible. But the most important thing is that we keep Lahaina local, that the Hawaiians and the Kama'aina, the immigrants that for over a century, the immigrant communities that were knit together with the Hawaiian community to make the Lahaina that everybody knows and loves. Everyone from Lahaina who wants to stay in Lahaina should be able to stay in Lahaina. But right now, there are hundreds of families that are tired. They're holding on with a white-knuckled grip. But I hear from friends every day that family after family just gives up and moves to another island or to the mainland.
And that's exactly what they're hoping that they'll do, right?
Yeah, I believe that's the goal. That is the goal. I mean, this fire, if you see the report that came out from the Attorney General, they show you who's at fault without naming. They don't say it. They show it and they say, well, we really can't determine who's responsible. But according to the AG report, there was a morning fire and a PM fire, an AM fire and a PM fire in exactly the same place where Hawaiian Electric power lines fell and started a fire. So you have to believe either the fire department didn't completely put out the fire and it slowly rekindled and then spread, or that those power lines were re-energized for some reason. And there's evidence that they were re-energized, and that's actually what I believe because they were having trouble pumping water. So, but regardless, Hawaiian Electric either way is responsible. BlackRock is the largest owner of Hawaiian Electric. So at the end of the day, we need to hold who is responsible, and we need to keep the locals in Lahaina.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you think, Jason, what could be the reason that the media stopped covering this when the residents of Lahaina need it the most? They need this message to get out there, and nobody else is talking about it.
If you look at the coverage of Ukraine, for example, or Gaza and Lahaina, I was actually in Ukraine with my work at the Vulnerable People Project. We advocate for the most vulnerable people in the world facing genocide, democide, or trapped in war. That's what we do. So I was in Ukraine. Then I was with Christian leaders from Ukraine in Washington, D.C., lobbying and meeting with members of Congress on the plight of Christians in the occupied oblasts. And while I was there, one of my best friends, Dallas Carter, a native Hawaiian leader, and he runs a ministry called Epic Ministries in the Hawaiian Islands, had pinged me about the fire. But I had a very packed day, and I was just afraid to really investigate, to read the text. So I said, let me finish my day and look at what's happening. When I discovered what happened in Lahaina, I got on the next plane that I could. So I was in Ukraine, DC, and then in Lahaina. And the damage in Lahaina was worse than I saw on the front lines of Ukraine. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was absolutely heartbreaking. And in fact, it was like in a war zone. As we were driving through the burn zone, there was a woman barefoot in tatters, walking in circles, mumbling to herself, the types of things that I often see in conflict zones. She was traumatized. And to think that this is the United States of America. My organization was first on the ground. And to see that even the large NGOs took months to get set up and established. I think hundreds of millions of dollars were raised for the residents of Hawaii, of Lahaina, but how much money made it to the residents of Lahaina? There are only 13,000 residents. So you think the United States of America that could fund not only our countless wars around the world, but other countries' wars, could rebuild this historic community of Lahaina and care for our own people.
It's really despicable to think that this government would have anything to do with that, and to not treat its own citizens with the respect and the basic human comforts and rights that they deserve. Is it true that some of the people weren't allowed to go back and visit their homes for quite a while?
Yeah, they were keeping locals out of their property. I want to go back. I love how your show opens with President Trump saying, relish the opportunity to be an outsider. Shemane, an outsider, either you're thrust to the outside by circumstances, for example, the families of Lahaina, or you choose to step from the inside to serve those who have been shoved to the outside. I really love that quote. And so to have you sharing your show and your platform, somebody with influence, to stand with the people of Lahaina who've been thrust out now. They are the outsiders. They feel abandoned. They feel forgotten. And I lived through the work of my organization, two of the biggest catastrophes in the history of the United States. We're the only organization left in Afghanistan, serving, hiding and feeding and evacuating. Every week we are still getting out former Afghan allies from Afghanistan to save second and then finally third countries. That devastating collapse in Afghanistan, we've forgotten about that, right? We just set a country on fire and skipped away. Yeah. And then there's this catastrophe in Lahaina, and we just look away. Under the same one president, we have two of the greatest catastrophes and the most embarrassing catastrophes, calamities in American history under the Biden administration. And then you compound that what we're seeing on college campuses today. This administration's a wreck. This election coming up in November is going to be very important, not just for at home, but for around the world. It is really quite sorrowful. I was just in Lahaina a couple of months ago. A member of my team was just there last week. And you know how it is when you experience a personal catastrophe, whether it's the loss of a spouse or a child. It's the hardest time isn't actually immediately, because it doesn't feel real. It's in the months and years after the event that the real pain sets in. And I feel that's what's happening in Lahaina right now. The gravity of the tragedy is setting in. As you know, you love Lahaina. It was a historic town. It was one of the most historic communities in America. It was a community that was knit together by laborers brought from around the world, Philippines, Okinawa, Japan, China, Portugal, Cuba, brought together, and they knit together a wonderful community with the Native Hawaiians. People from around the world. Lahaina is probably one of the most beloved towns in the world. And so it's sad to think that a place where so many people around the world have an affinity to could just be forgotten.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I got about 30 seconds left. What do you think about the 15-minute city theory for Maui? I tried to research it before we got on. Everything is buried, and all you can find is, no, that's wrong. There's nothing. They were never planning on being a 15-minute city, but they were, right?
They were definitely planning on it being a smart city. Here's the real catastrophe. They've learned nothing. Do you know that they didn't maintain the brakes? The power lines should be buried. They have hurricane force winds all of the time in fields of grass that were plantations, sugarcane plantations. The breaks weren't maintained. The lines weren't buried. Do you know they're stringing the lines up now? The governor of Hawaii is traveling the world blaming the fire on climate change. No, it was mismanagement. At the very least, it was you didn't maintain the breaks. You didn't release the water. Those power lines should have been buried decades ago. They're buried in the affluent neighborhoods. How is it you can't afford to now we have $5 billion in damage. They built 10 miles of rail in Hawaii, 10 miles of rail for $11 billion. You could have buried the power lines for much less than that. But they didn't learn. This is not a black swan event. They have hurricane force winds in Lahaina and Maui all of the time. And now what are they doing? They're putting power lines up again rather than burying them.
Jason, I would love to continue this discussion, but my time's up here. I got to go. But thank you so much for sharing with us. I hope you can come back and especially tell us more about the documentary too.
All right. Thank you, Shemane.